I know he got strength with Puerto Ricans, his people. But as far as Tupac being in prison, Joe, to keep the Puerto Ricans off his back because they think that he got beef with Joe in the street or some, I don't know about that.
Welcome to the Gossip Channel. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We're growing with you and because of you. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Once we hit that milestone, a special prize will be waiting for you. Stay tuned. And now, let's get into the topic. One thing Fat Joe always gets credit for is his wild hip-hop storytelling. He's got a way of spinning a tale that makes it sound larger than life, whether he's talking about himself or somebody else. But here's the twist. A lot of those so-called legendary stories might not be so true after all. Plenty of people in the industry have already called him out, even giving him the nickname Tino for stretching the truth. Still, you can't deny Fat Joe knows how to keep a crowd locked in, because when he starts talking, people can't stop listening. But the problem kicks in when Fat Joe's stories stop being fun and start sounding flat out unbelievable. Some of these tales are so wild that even people who weren't alive during that time can instantly tell something don't line up. One of the most talked about and flat out ridiculous stories he told was about his high school days. Fat Joe claimed he robbed his entire gym class. Not a couple classmates, but the whole gym, around 70 students. And here's the kicker, he said he didn't even use a weapon, just walked in and somehow scared 70 teenagers into handing over all their stuff. As if the story wasn't already crazy enough, Fat Joe claimed he stole so much that he couldn't even carry it all. And get this, some of the same kids he was robbing supposedly helped him haul the stuff out. That's the part that had everybody scratching their heads. Content creator Will Mills even spoke on it, saying exactly what most people were already thinking. The whole thing just sounds way too far-fetched. I mean, picture it. A packed Bronx gym full of noise, teachers, and kids running around. And somehow, Joe pulled off robbing 70 students without a single person noticing? Then there's the number, 70 students, and not a single one fought back or even questioned what was happening. They all just stood there and let it go down? That's the part nobody can wrap their head around. Mills even tried to give Joe some slack, saying maybe he did rob a couple kids back then, maybe one or two. That's believable enough. But 70 all by himself, and then getting help from the same people he supposedly jacked? That's where the whole story just collapses. And that gym class story was just the beginning. Fat Joe's got plenty more wild tales that make people raise an eyebrow just as high. One of the biggest ones? His claim about Tupac. Back in 1995, Joe was on the radio talking about the infamous East Coast versus West Coast beef, stirring up some serious noise. According to him, word got around to Puerto Rican inmates who weren't feeling what he said. Then Joe takes it even further, claiming Tupac somehow heard about it from behind bars and personally called him from prison, asking for help with a Puerto Rican inmate who was giving him problems. Joe swore up and down that he and Pac actually had a conversation, smoothed things out, and kept it all love. He even claimed he sent word through his guy Charlie Rock LD, telling him to hold Pac down while he was locked up. But here's where it gets messy. In a recent interview, Tupac's cousin William Lease completely shut that whole story down. He admitted Fat Joe had influence with his Puerto Rican circle, sure, but the idea that Tupac needed Joe's protection in prison, he said that made no sense at all. According to Lease, the New York State prison where Tupac was locked up was already full of people who knew him and genuinely loved him. Pac wasn't in a spot where anyone could just walk all over him. It was the complete opposite. From the moment he stepped in, he had solid people ready to ride for him. Lease even said that when Pac first arrived, folks were already waiting with care packages, ready to make sure he was good. And the wild part, Pac didn't even want their help. Hussein also explained that the only reason Tupac was ever pulled out of general population and placed in segregation was because he had so many powerful connections inside. Prison officials didn't want any smoke or incidents breaking out, so they separated him for safety. So when you really think about it, the idea that some random Puerto Rican inmate had Pac so pressed that he had to reach out to Fat Joe for backup, that story just doesn't add up at all. And that Tupac story wasn't the only time Fat Joe got caught stretching the truth. Another messy one that came back to haunt him was about Big Pun. For years, Joe has been out here publicly claiming that he looked after Pun's wife and family after Pun passed away. He bragged about giving her money, helping her set up a business, and making sure she was financially stable. But according to Gangugu Roach, a man who specializes in helping artist families recover lost royalties in publishing, that couldn't be further from the truth. Gangu revealed that he actually had to take Fat Joe to court on behalf of Big Pun's wife, and what he exposed was shocking. After digging into the paperwork, he discovered Joe had allegedly been pocketing Pun's royalties for 14 years. According to Gangu, Joe was even generating fake royalty statements and teaming up with Jellybean Benitez to send those bogus reports straight to Pun's wife. He also said she had tried going through multiple lawyers before him, but none of them could ever get her real justice. When Gangu stepped in, he finally managed to drag Fat Joe into court and put the truth out in the open. And this is where Joe's lies really started stacking up. He didn't just claim he gave Pun's wife money when, in reality, she never saw a dime. He also went on interviews swearing there was never even a court case. Meanwhile, there absolutely was. Gangu admitted he couldn't believe how easily people just ate up Joe's stories. He even revealed that when a Big Pun movie was in the works, the producers wanted Fat Joe involved, hoping his name and industry ties could help push the film forward. But according to Gangu, Joe allegedly refused to lift a finger unless Pun's wife went public and said he never stole from her. Of course she refused, because he did steal from her. So now Fat Joe isn't just looking like a liar, he's looking like a thief too. And the wildest part? People still keep eating up his stories like they're gospel. Another prime example of Joe's shaky, ever-changing storytelling came from a bold claim he made about none other than the notorious B.I.G. In 2023, Joe sat down on Cam Capone's platform and dropped what he clearly thought was a mind-blowing revelation. Joe claimed that back in the day, he and Biggie actually recorded a whole project together, a full album with 8 to 10 songs. According to him, the reason nobody's ever heard it is because the project got scrapped and most likely destroyed. Why? Because the tracks were supposedly way too disrespectful, filled with heavy disses aimed at Tupac. Now, on the surface, it almost sounds believable. Joe and Biggie definitely had a connection, both from New York, moving in the same circles, showing each other mutual respect. So at first glance, people were like, okay, maybe. But once fans started digging deeper, the cracks showed quick, especially when you line that story up against Joe's own past statements. Let's take it back to September 2018. Fat Joe was on Vlad TV talking about Biggie, and his version of the story sounded completely different. Back then, he said they had been working on an album, but only got around to recording 4 songs before it all fell apart. He even claimed Puff Daddy and the Hitmen were producing the project. But here's where it gets even messier. Fast forward to March 2021, when Joe went live with Swizz Beatz and Timbaland during all the hype around Versus. Suddenly, the story shifted again. This time, Joe said he and Biggie had recorded 5 tracks together. And then came Lil Cease, one of the people closest to Biggie, who shut things down with some real insight. In December 2021, Cease sat down on Vlad TV and explained exactly how Big felt about the whole East Coast versus West Coast beef. According to him, Biggie couldn't stand the idea of fueling that drama. He straight up told his junior MAFIA crew that dissing Tupac was a line nobody was allowed to cross. Big made it crystal clear, if anyone in the camp recorded a diss track, he was cutting them off immediately. That right there shows exactly where Biggie's mind was at. He wanted to lock in on the music, not get caught up in pointless drama. And if Big was that strict with his own crew, why would he suddenly flip and record a whole album full of diss tracks with Fat Joe? It doesn't make sense. Then, in January 2022, Lil Cease showed up again, this time on The Art of Dialogue, and he shut those rumors all the way down. Cease, who was practically glued to Biggie's side during that entire era, said he never once saw or heard Biggie recording anything with Joe. At best, they might have tossed the idea around, but that kind of casual talk wasn't unusual back then. But when it came to actual music, Cease made it clear none of those songs ever existed. He also pointed out something crucial. Biggie wasn't the type of artist to go out of his way making full-on diss tracks. Yeah, he might drop a slick line here and there, that's just hip-hop. But a whole project packed with shots at Tupac. That just wasn't who Big was, especially at a time when the East Coast versus West Coast beef was already spiraling completely out of control. Now there's also this mysterious rumor that's been floating around online. Some say years ago there was a clip on World Star Hip Hop where Diddy himself supposedly addressed the whole Fat Joe Biggie album claim. The story goes that Diddy flat out denied ever knowing anything about it. But here's the catch. Nobody can actually find that clip anymore. It's become one of those lost pieces of hip-hop internet history. Maybe it was real, maybe it never existed. But what's interesting is that fans don't buy the idea of Diddy just letting a full Biggie project vanish, especially back then when posthumous releases were pulling in major money. And if there's one thing we know, Diddy's always about business. If there really was unreleased music, chances are Diddy would have dropped it, unless there was a serious reason not to. On the other hand, if those tracks were actually loaded with disses aimed at Pac, maybe Diddy shelved the whole thing out of respect, or just to avoid pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. That's possible too. Cuban Link also weighed in on the debate, and he's another one who doubts the whole album story. Having his own history with both Biggie and Fat Joe, Cuban admitted Joe definitely had some type of relationship with Big, but he firmly believed the claim of a full project was exaggerated. In fact, Cuban Link has called out Fat Joe plenty of times for being less than honest, less than truthful. That's how Cuban Link described Joe's claims. In one of his interviews, Cuban laid out his version of what really went down with the song Joe swears was part of this so-called Biggie album. According to him, he, Pun, and Joe once pulled up to Diddy's studio where they got the chance to meet Biggie. For Cuban, this was his very first time meeting the legendary rapper. After some quick introductions, Dixie told Big to break down his vision for a track. Biggie wanted a Spanish-flavored intro to give the song a unique twist, something with that Spanish gangster spice. Since Cuban was the only one fluent in Spanish, Big looked his way. But as a rookie, Cuban wasn't sure he could deliver until Pun pushed him to go for it.
The whole gym. Like 70 kids without a gun. Like, yo, everybody give me your codes. Some of the guys I robbed had to help me carry this stuff.
Cuban finally stepped up to the mic, and with Pun by his side, they laid down the Spanish intro Biggie had imagined. Big loved it, hyped them up, and showed real love for their contribution. Then Fat Joe hopped on the mic to sprinkle his own flavor on the track. But here's where the drama comes in. Cuban claims that today, Fat Joe is trying to take credit for the Spanish intro that he and Pun actually created. He says Joe has been using a snippet of that same track to push the narrative that he and Biggie recorded a whole album together. Cuban calls it what it is, a straight-up exaggeration, and he hasn't been shy about blasting Joe for it. For Cuban, the truth is simple. There was no secret album, just one track with a collaborative studio vibe, nothing more. But Joe's messy claims don't stop with Biggie and Tupac. In 2022, he stirred up even more drama in another interview, boldly saying he was the one responsible for getting Trick Daddy and Pitbull their record deals. That statement didn't sit right with Uncle Luke, who wasted zero time hopping on Instagram to call Fat Joe out directly. Luke, a Miami hip-hop pioneer, wasn't about to let that slide, so he jumped in with a detailed clap back. He said, "I love Joe. but I find this very interesting because I discovered Trick Daddy. He did his first song with me right after getting out of jail, and he stayed with me. I also discovered and signed Pitbull to my platinum-selling Luke Records label. He did his first songs with me. Because I'm from Miami, I understood the importance of signing a Cuban rapper, so I picked him up off battle rap tapes. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I do have the receipts. And just because you don't see me in every video or birthday party doesn't mean I wasn't there. I also found DJ Khaled on Underground Radio Mix 96 and brought him to mainstream radio. Luke's response didn't just stand alone, it got a major cosign from NFL legend Deion Sanders, who jumped in with a fiery comment that turned the heat all the way up. He said, "Tell him hero." Sometimes they forget. Luke's always been that dude. He was one of my heroes and still is. Y'all have no idea what this man fought for. The music you hear today exists because of his heart, conviction, and his fight for what he believed in. After that wave of backlash, Fat Joe went live with Uncle Luke to clear the air, but his explanation had fans cringing. Joe tried to walk it back, saying he never claimed to have discovered Trick Daddy and Pitbull, just that he was the catalyst for getting them signed. But the video showed Luke looking confused and skeptical the whole time as Joe tried to spin it. Fans didn't waste a second calling Joe out, dragging his explanation for being sloppy and completely unconvincing. Joe tried to play it off like it was all out of love for hip-hop, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Even Trick Daddy himself stepped in, making it clear he wasn't rocking with Joe's version of events. In Trick's eyes, the idea of an East Coast rapper like Fat Joe being the one to land a Miami artist, a deal just didn't add up, especially back then, when tension between East Coast and Southern rappers was at an all-time high. Trick stated it plain and simple. Back then, no Southern artist was doing real work or had any real affiliation with East Coast rappers because the two sides just weren't on good terms. So the idea that someone from the East Coast would randomly scoop up a Miami artist's music, shop it around, and get him a deal with no strings attached? Trick said flat out he just didn't see that happening. And honestly, Trick's perspective makes sense, especially given the cultural divide of that era. A lot of East Coast rappers looked down on Southern artists back then, so the thought of Fat Joe going out of his way to advocate for Trick's music feels pretty far-fetched. Trick even joked that maybe Joe was just being forgetful or straight up hallucinating. But this whole situation sparked a wave of backlash, with fans accusing Fat Joe of trying to downplay and undermine the contributions of black artists to hip-hop. A lot of people saw his claims as a way of rewriting history, inserting himself into stories where he didn't belong. And if that wasn't messy enough, Fat Joe has also faced allegations of being a snitch. He's denied it, of course, but every time he tries to clear his name, it only seems to backfire. In one video addressing the rumors, instead of giving a clear explanation, Joe went off on tangents and vague statements, leaving fans even more suspicious. Although Fat Joe is still seen as a respected figure in hip-hop, all these questionable stories and messy slip-ups have definitely put cracks in his reputation. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to the Gossip channel, drop a like, and let me know what you think in the comments below.